So today's webinar is about the cultural orientation assessment. And I know that many of you had mentioned that you were interested in learning more about the assessment. So hopefully this webinar can answer some of those questions to you. Before we get started, if you have any questions as we go along, please make sure to write them into the chat box or the questions box, and I will try to address them as I can. And I will be asking you to participate. So again, keep an eye out for the chat box and send me your messages that way so you can participate. So today we're going to be talking about the assessment. So we're going to address the questions of why are we assessing? So what is the importance of this? We're going to talk about the different versions of the assessment that Cal provides. We're going to be talking about scoring and prompting, which is a bit confusing. So we're going to try to clarify some of those issues. And we're going to go over some example questions from the cultural orientation assessment. And so this is where I'm going to be asking for your participation. So you all are really the experts in these questions. You've asked them to your clients, you've gotten answers. So I want to hear from you about your correct and incorrect answers. Finally, we're going to wrap it up with some notes about the administration of the assessment and standards that you should be following. And a last note about data collection and sort of a look at the future and what you might want to do with your cultural orientation assessment. So right now, I've spoken with almost all of you, I believe, regarding your cultural orientations and your use of the assessment. And so throughout the network, I found that almost all of you are currently using the Cal model assessment, either as it is or some sort of modified version. And as I mentioned before, those of you who are not using it, I know that you're interested in beginning to implement that. So this is a good sign. So why are we using the assessment? We want to make sure that clients are understanding key information. So some of this is outlined by PRM, some of it is ECDC requirements. So we really want to make sure that they understand this information, not just that they're sitting through another thing to check off on your list. We know there's a lot of services you must provide in R&T, and we really want to make sure that cultural orientation and assessment is provided so clients really understand what's going on in their environment. So if they do understand their environment and how to integrate, it's going to ease that process. So of course we want the best for our clients. So the assessment is a tool that we can use to make sure that they're on the right path. Another reason that I want you to be using the cultural orientation assessment from Cal specifically is so that we have a common measure across the network. So we all have various methods of providing cultural orientation, different curriculums, different activities. So we want to create a common thread somewhere so that we can see, how is it going across the network at each affiliate office. And of course, this is a requirement by ECDC that you do assessment on cultural orientation. So now we're going to talk about the two methods of providing assessment that Cal gives us. And so the first one is called the oral assessment. And the oral assessment obviously is done orally, so the assessor sits down with the client and is asking questions, reading these questions off of the oral assessment sheet. This may also be done through a translator, so if your client does not speak English and they speak a different language that Cal has translated it to, your translator should actually be reading from the translated assessment, assuming that they speak one of the languages. So instead of having the assessor say the questions in English and having a translator freely translate, we want to make sure that that translator is also following the translated assessment whenever that's possible. So of course the client will answer orally and in their language or in English. And the assessor should be recording the answer, so you should be writing down what they say. Now, if it's being translated, this is sort of up to you if you want to write down both, have the translator or you write down both the answer in their language and in English, or if you just want to write it in English. But the key is that you are recording the answers. And I believe that in speaking with you at our interviews, I'm pretty sure that nearly 100% of you are doing this, so that's great. The last step, of course, once you have this information, you can calculate the score. So you should not be calculating the score as you go along. Once you've finished the assessment, then you can go to the side and calculate that score by yourself. Here I have a link to the oral assessment, and again, it is provided in a variety of languages, so remember to check that out if you need to. So now we go to the written assessment. So the written assessment and the oral assessment were designed slightly differently. So you want to make sure that you're using the correct assessment version that you're going to be using. So the consideration of the written assessment is that the wording is actually more appropriate for written responses. So it's more appropriate for the client to be reading this and writing their response. Okay? So because this is a pretty intensive activity for some of our refugee clients, we need to make sure that, of course, the client is literate in the chosen language. We also want to make sure that they have some sort of formal education and that they have demonstrated competency at filling out forms in the past. So it's not just about can they read English, can they write in English or in their chosen language. It's do they understand how this process works. So we want to make sure that we only give the written assessment to clients who have demonstrated these capabilities. So the directions on this, clients are given the survey or the assessment in the appropriate language. They will write their answers. They're allowed to ask for clarification. That's not a problem. You may want to encourage this, that if they have any questions on the assessment, that they should let you know so that they're providing the answers that you're looking for. And again, after they're finished with the written assessment, you will score the document afterwards. And here again, this is a link. Cal has multiple translations of the written assessment for your use if you want to go to that site. So when you're trying to decide whether you want to use the oral or the written assessment, these are some of your considerations. So the good thing about the oral assessment is that clients may feel more comfortable asking for clarification. The assessor can use prompts, so you can ask follow-up questions to make sure that they are understanding it. So if they misunderstand the question the first time, it's easier for you to get them the right question so they may answer it correctly. And this is also, of course, good for pre-literate clients, clients who are unable to do the written assessment, whether they are unable to read or unable to write. Some of the cons of the oral assessment is that it can be time-consuming. So I've heard this from some of you that have larger populations, larger cases. Because the oral assessment must be given to one person at a time. So you cannot give the oral assessment to a group. So it has to be one at a time, which can be time-consuming if you have many arrivals and you're trying to schedule them out, taking maybe 10 to 15 minutes on this assessment. Another con to think about is that there may be errors in transcription. So whether that's from the assessor or the translator, perhaps there's some miscommunication or mishearing of what they have said. So that is a possible con there. For the written assessment, something that's great about the written assessment is that it can be administered to multiple individuals at the same time. So you can give this to a group because they should be working individually. They should not be working together. So each person will have their own written assessment, but it can be administered at the same time. So you're only going to be taking 15 to 20 minutes on the assessment for your large group of people. Cons with the written assessment is that there's a potential for client misunderstanding. So again, if the client doesn't quite understand the question, but maybe they're too shy to ask about it, or they just write the answer that they think that they should be, that could be a potential problem. There's a potential for unclear answers or handwriting. So I would walk around the room or walk around, make sure that you are checking out their handwriting, make sure that everything looks clear. To alleviate the potential for misunderstanding, you may also wish to walk around and ask everyone if they're doing okay, do they have any questions, and make that easy for them. The last thing here is test anxiety. Because the written assessment is more like a test, clients may perceive it as such, when it is actually, it's not really a test. There are no cut scores, there's no passing, and there's no failing. But clients may get some anxiety about being tested. So make sure that you explain to them that that is not the case, and try to alleviate that anxiety. So now we're going to talk about scoring. So something important with scoring is that you are consistent. So this is why it's really important to record your answers that the clients give for each question. So you're able to look back on these questions and make sure that you're scoring them in the same way. And you should, of course, be following the CAL guidance that they give you. So each question actually has guidance on how to score it. So they provide you with some potential prompts that you might ask, with some potential answers that they may give you, sometimes what might be considered correct, what might be considered incorrect. So make sure to read those. And also make sure that when you are following up with them that you're not you're not asking loaded leading questions. So a leading question would be, if we're talking about the safety question, if the client is not quite giving the answer that you're looking for, if you ask, isn't it a good idea to supervise your children when they're playing outside? So that would be a leading question that you would want to avoid and ask more generic questions. So again, there's really no passing or failing score. So there's no research into this. CAL does not have any sort of cut scores. Again, this is not a test. It's just an assessment. So make sure that your clients are aware of this. And don't try to put them in passing or failing categories. So if they do get questions incorrect, that's just something that you'll need to follow up on. And it doesn't necessarily reflect that they completely misunderstood the whole topic because it's only one question. So, so make sure to follow up with those. And as you're going along, make note of problem questions. So if you're seeing a pattern in clients misunderstanding the same questions or giving the same answers, you might want to make note of that. So next we're going to talk about prompting. And so this is something that is a bit confusing. The guidance is a little bit unclear. So we're going to try to clarify some of that and talk about what do they mean by prompting. So when you're prompting, you can either allow points for the question or not allow points for the question. So the CAL guidance on this tells you that you should allow points simply if the client misunderstands the question and you need to prompt them so that they understand the actual question that's being asked. Another thing that they tell you is that if the client gives an acceptable response, perhaps, but it's not really the one that you're looking for. So you can try to prompt to get a more accurate result of what you're really looking for. When they tell you that you should give no points, this is some of the guidance from CAL. So let's just go over that quickly. The client only offers a vague answer. So what I would add to this is if the client offers a vague answer and you prompt them and they still offer a vague answer, I would have to allow no points for that. Obviously, if they offer an incorrect answer, whether that's before or after prompting, that's going to have to be no points there. Or if the client, for some reason, refuses to answer. So questions like, how will your family get money, the one that we see here. If the client is elderly or disabled and maybe they think that their family will support them and they refuse to answer this, and according to the Cal guidance here, you can prompt them, how will she get money to support the family? So how will your family help you? In what situation? So if they just refuse to answer even after prompting, this would be no point. So what we're going to do next is go over 3 questions from the model assessment. And I should also mention that there is a new version, a 2015 version of both the oral and the written. So make sure that you have the correct versions if you are using the model assessment. So we're going to start with question number 3. And again, this is where I'm going to need your participation. So make sure that you write in your answers in the chat box or in the question box so that we can get your ideas. So we're going to go through each question, and I'm going to ask you for some of the correct responses that you might see on this and some of the incorrect responses. So starting with question 3, the question says, can you tell me 2 services provided by your agency that help refugees resettle or adjust to life in the U.S.? Now, I also have the guidance written up here as well. So I'm going to read that, so bear with me. If client names something related to, but not the responsibility of the resettlement agency, or does not specify how the service provided by another organization is connected to the agency, for example, if they say public assistance instead of signs me up for public assistance, prompt, can you think of anything else? If an individual's responses are all too general, they will help me, you may prompt, can you think of specific things they can do to help you adjust to life in the U.S.? All right, so this last part I've highlighted in blue. So I want you to pay close attention to that since we will be speaking about that right now. Local resettlement agencies should provide assessors with a list of correct responses. For example, what direct services and referrals are offered, and what responses are close but not directly connected or too vague and thus suitable for prompting. All right, so I need your participation on this. So let's start off with some correct responses. So as a local resettlement agency, when you're thinking about your list of correct responses, what your agency provides, please tell me some things that might count as a correct answer. So I'll give you a couple minutes to write in. All right, remember, use the chat box to type in your answers. What are some correct answers to this question? All right, some correct responses. Employment services. So if your organization offers employment services or match grants, so that would be considered a correct response. Okay, signing up for food stamps, that would be correct. Are there any others? All right, so let's move to incorrect responses. Are there any responses? Sorry, one moment here. Are there any responses that you have received when giving the assessment that have been too vague or completely incorrect? So what have you seen at your agencies? Okay, I'm sorry. I missed some of these from before. So some of the correct responses here, we've got English training. See that a couple times. They help me to register my children in school, or job training. Find housing, places to rent. Yep, I see that a couple times. So safe housing is great. Cultural orientation, health services. Okay, perfect. All right, so now that we're talking about the vague responses or the incorrect responses, are there any, is there any feedback on that? What would you think is too vague of an answer, or, okay. So it seems like some of you are getting one-word type answers, not too much explanation about how specifically the agency is going to be helping with that. So that's great. So an example of that would be a job. So the question is, how are they going, what kind of service is going to be provided so that they can get a job? So if they're able to speak more to speaking with the employment counselor, or they help me fill out a job application, that kind of thing. So again, for housing, for example, if the client says housing, you might want to prompt for them to explain a little bit more. So if they can explain how exactly the agency is helping them with housing. So whether that's finding a house, paying their rent. So you'll need to dig a little bit deeper if they answer, one or two word responses. All right. So we'll move on to the next question. So this is question number 7 on the assessment. And the question says, what are 2 things a refugee can do to become employed? So again, the guidance here says, response should reflect tangible steps toward employment, including steps on a job search or application, learning English, job training, or getting necessary documentation. If refugees' response is too general, for example, go to the agency, which agency are they talking about? We don't know. Or related to attributes that make one employable, for example, being hardworking and honest, you can prompt, can you think of anything else? If the refugee indicates they cannot work due to age or disability, or if they are already employed, prompt, what can any refugee do to become employed? So again, this is another one of those questions that even if it doesn't apply to the client, we want to make sure that they understand the process of how this works. So if it's an elderly person, perhaps their grandchild or child is able to work, so they should know generally what does that person need to do to become employed. So again, let's talk about some of the correct answers that you've heard. So we'll start there. So what are some of the concrete things that refugees can do to become employed? So what are the answers that you have heard in your practice? So maybe speaking English. So they need to learn English if they do not already. That's a really important skill. Okay, attending job clubs, talking to job developers. Great. Talking to friends and families, that's also really important. A lot of the times refugees might have better connections to some of the jobs through their friends and family, so that's really great. Okay, creating a resume has also been mentioned, and completing an application. Again, social networking, that's great. All right, so let's talk about some of the incorrect answers. So what have you heard that has either been too vague or incorrect? All right, so maybe they just mentioned the resettlement agency. That would definitely be too vague, so we want to know how specifically the refugee agency would be able to help. Okay, being a citizen would definitely be an incorrect response, so we want to make sure that they understand that they are automatically work authorized. So being a citizen would not be correct. Great. Okay, so we also have age. So, so that might be a little bit too vague. There are, of course, age requirements in the U.S. for working. So if they're referring to being of a certain age, you might want to request for some clarification from them. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. And this one I know has gotten a lot of feedback on. So I'm really interested to hear your responses and get some clarification here. So question number 8. Imagine I'm a friend who's staying with you at your home. Tell me how to get from your home to the nearest grocery store. Be sure to give me specific instructions so that I can get there by myself. And the guidance states that the assessor may substitute another critical service. So you can choose what you want, whatever's important to your agency. Correct answers may be a description of driving or walking directions, or stating which bus or train to take and where to get off. The participant need not name specific streets, but should provide some description of which direction and how far to go, or how far to go on public transportation. The answer should provide sufficient evidence that the participant knows where the grocery store or other critical service is. The question is not testing the participant's ability to provide directions. All right, so that's a lot of guidance. That's maybe a little bit confusing because the question states specific instructions, but the guidance says that it doesn't really need to be specific. So the feedback that I've gotten from Cal is that this question is really just providing evidence that they know where the store is, right? So for me, I could give you directions to my grocery store, and I could give you specific street names. I could tell you turn left, turn right, maybe even how far to go, how many miles. So those would be specific directions. So that's not what Cal is looking for here. They just want to make sure that they provide evidence that they know where it is. So don't be asking for very specific directions. If you feel like they do understand where the store is, then I think you should be awarding points for that. So I want to start this one off. Instead of correct answers, I want to start off with incorrect answers. So can you tell me, what do you think would be an incorrect answer to this question? So, okay, so somebody says that they go with their family in their car, so they get a ride. So for Cal, that would be considered incorrect. So if they can describe the area in which the store is located, maybe they can describe which part of town it's in, maybe they can tell you things that are nearby. It's nearby the library, or it's close to my house. If they can provide you with some more instruction about exactly where the grocery store is, that would be important. Because even though it's nice that the relative is giving them a ride, we do want to make sure that they are able to function on their own if that relative is not available. Okay. Okay, so I see some of you have some challenges in determining where the grocery store might be. So how do you even know if the directions they give you are correct? So that's a really great question. So if anybody else has feedback on that about what kinds of questions have you seen, what kinds of answers have you seen that you've been considering correct to this question? Or is there a way that you're asking the question so that it's more understandable to the client? Okay, so we have somebody who had an answer that was mentioning only one street name. So that might be perhaps a little bit too vague, so maybe try to get a little bit more information there. Okay, well, let me tell you well, one answer that would definitely be considered incorrect. So that would be, I walk. So instead of answering about a specific way of getting there in terms of directions, if they tell you, I get a ride, or I take the bus, or I walk, this is considered an incorrect response. So we want to make sure that they're providing that evidence that they have some idea of where the grocery store is. And if you don't know where that grocery store is, you would most likely have to take the participant's word at that. All right. So this is our last question that we're going to be going over. So if anyone has other questions or answers that they want to ask, please write that in the question box, and we'll try to answer that in the next minute here. Otherwise, we will move on. All right, so we're going to move on. Thank you very much for participating. So we're just going to wrap up with some notes about administration of the assessment. So the first thing that I want to talk about is letting some time pass. So I know that a lot of you are really short on time, which I understand. Now the guidance states that you should let some time pass. So that would mean maybe a few days after the last cultural orientation session. The reason we want to do this is because if you're providing the assessment at the end of the class or the last day of cultural orientation, they may be just regurgitating information that they just heard. So it may not have really sunk in. They may not really understand it. So we want to let a few days pass to make sure that that information sticks. You want to have a plan for correcting incorrect responses. So if the client is providing you with some incorrect responses that you have marked down on the assessment, you want to make sure that you have a plan for review. So this should be some sort of policy. So make sure that you're reviewing the topics that they don't understand or that they got incorrect. And it's up to you if you think they merit a follow-up assessment or if you want to just put that in the case notes as client now demonstrates knowledge of cultural orientation topics. So that would be an option as well. So that leads me as well to the documenting understanding. Aside from the assessment, it's a good idea to put this in the case notes as well. So what Cal has guidance on in putting that in the case notes is saying refugee demonstrated understanding of ... and put that in there. So it might seem silly to write these things in there, but if you're writing it in a standardized way, so if you're always talking about cultural orientation understanding, and you always started off with refugee demonstrated understanding of, it's going to be a lot easier to track that information in your case notes and a lot easier to find it. So as for the standards of giving the CO assessment, CAL's directions state insert your agency's name. So when you print out the model assessment, you'll see that there are areas in which you need to write your own agency's name. So this is especially important if you're giving the written assessment. You want to make sure that you switch that out with the correct information. They also mention substituting local vocabulary where necessary. So that might be up to you if you call the public transportation system by its name, or if you say metro or you say subway. Whatever you use, you should substitute that. Now for the other wording, they recommend that you don't change the wording. So I would add to that, don't change the wording too much. So if you do have a problem with a question and you feel like there might be a better way to ask it, I would really encourage you to send that information to me here at ECDC. So we want to make sure that everybody's understanding it, make sure that you are all comfortable using the assessment. So please report misunderstandings or any of your feedback or comments to me so that I can start compiling that information and maybe we can develop a better assessment for the whole network. So looking forward to data collection. This is something that you might want to think about once you have solidified your cultural orientation program and really have it going well. This isn't necessarily something that you need to worry about right now if your program is not quite solid. But this is something to think about for the future. So how will you be recording scores? So the CO assessment, you can get either 10 or 11 points, depending on how many questions they do. So how are you going to record that? Where is that information going to be stored? So many of you are keeping the copy in the case file, which is great. Some of you are writing it in the case notes, which is even better. And some of you have some sort of Excel spreadsheet where you're keeping that information, which is awesome. So we want to see, of course, we want to copy in the case file, but we also want to see some sort of score storage so that we can start looking at this information. You may also consider recording the attendance. So if you have a cultural orientation program that is supposed to be 4 days in length, if they only attend a couple sessions, you might want to take note of that. And the main point of collecting this information is you want to start thinking about how are you going to use this data to inform your practice. So what are some things that we can learn from the data? So I have here a by nationality chart. So this is completely fictional, just an example of something you might want to think about. So is cultural orientation working the same way for all groups of people? And so I'm sure many of you have seen that it's probably not. So the CO assessment was actually tested on the majority of Iraqi clients. So the questions might be more geared towards those clients rather than others. So I don't know, but we need to start looking at this information to really find out. And so you might be able to make changes to your practice based on this kind of information. And at the bottom of the screen here, this is an example of how you might want to store your cultural orientation assessment data. So this one just has the scores and the number of questions that it was out of. My only addition to this, so this was taken from Cal, but I added a column for the alien number because the alien number is a unique identifier. So if you are tracking information, as opposed to only putting the case number down, I would also encourage you to give them a unique identifier like the alien number. So that will make it easier to add information to that list if you're interested. So that's all that we have today on the assessment. As most of you should be aware, Cal has actually stopped doing the cultural orientation, and it is now IRC who is responsible for all cultural orientation resources, new and old. So that information is going to be at coresourceexchange.org. I believe it is in construction now, so there's not too much information there, but keep an eye out on it. And any of the old information is still available at the Cal website, which is here. So you can go to the Cal Orientation Toolkit if you need the assessment or any guides on how to provide cultural orientation. That is still there. And my contact information is at the bottom. Again, I would love to hear from you about your feedback on how the assessment is going, what kinds of misunderstandings you're seeing, and what kinds of suggestions you have to make it better. So I'll open it up one last time for questions. So if there are any final questions or comments, I would love to hear them. So I'll give a minute for that. So there's a question about correcting some scores. So if you have already given an assessment and you've scored it, and perhaps you learned something today that maybe you might want to change the scoring, I would say that's really up to you, because right now the assessment is a tool so that we can understand whether the clients have really integrated this information. So if you do feel like the clients understood and did well in their cultural orientation, changing the scoring is not critical right now. However, I would say if you are recording your information digitally, so if you do have an Excel spreadsheet or something like that where you're keeping track of results, I might want to change them. So I might want to take a look. You could also use it as a learning activity. So if you have your case managers come together and take a look at how you scored it and discuss what we learned today and what Cal recommends, that could be a good learning activity. Okay. I also have noticed that perhaps the Arabic translation of question number 8 is a bit confusing. So if anybody else has experienced that with their Arabic-speaking clients, please let us know. All right. Well, we will close there. If you have other questions or comments, again, feel free to send them to me. And thank you so much for participating and attending today's webinar. And I will speak with you all soon. Bye.